No child came when the old man was sick. A few months later, when they read the will, they screamed.
Hello everyone. Enjoy these relaxing moments while you watch.
Raymond's villa exuded opulence with its soaring ceilings, glittering crystal chandeliers, and luxurious furnishings. Yet, the atmosphere was cold and empty. In a large room tucked in the corner of the villa, old Raymond lay on the bed, his dim eyes fixed on the ceiling, his face deeply etched with the marks of age and illness. Mary, the maid who had worked for Raymond's family for 20 years, quietly entered the room with a silver tray in hand. "Mr. Raymond, it's time for your medicine," she said, her voice gentle but tinged with tension. Raymond slowly turned his head, a faint smile flickering on his lips. "Thank you, Mary. You're the only one who still remembers me," he said in a raspy voice. Mary placed the tray on the small table by the bed, then helped Raymond sit up. "Did your children call to check on you?" she asked, more as a comfort than expecting an answer. Raymond sighed and shook his head. "No, they're too busy. James is always working, and Anna and David have their own families. I'm just a burden to them." Raymond drifted into his memories. In his youth, he had been a successful businessman, respected and beloved. This villa had once been filled with the laughter of his family. He had worked tirelessly all his life to support his children, ensure they received an education, marry them off, and guarantee they lacked nothing. But now, as his health declined, his children used busyness as an excuse to avoid him. That evening, Raymond lay on his bed, gazing through the large window. Moonlight bathed the room, but his heart was heavy. The family portrait on the wall, taken years ago when Anna and David were young children and James was an ambitious young man, twisted his heart. The beautiful memories seemed like distant dreams. Mary sat in a corner of the room, sighing softly as she watched Raymond. She knew how deeply hurt he was by his children's indifference, but there was little she could do beyond fulfilling her duties. Since James's return, things seemed to have worsened. The next morning, the clatter of drawers in Raymond's study broke the silence. Startled, Mary hurried to check. James, Raymond's eldest son, was rifling through the drawers, his eyes glinting with greed. "Mr. James, what are you doing?" Mary asked, trying to keep her voice steady. James turned, offering a fake smile. "Oh, nothing, Mary. Just looking for some of Father's old documents." But Mary wasn't easily deceived. She knew James didn't care about his father. His only interest was in Raymond's wealth. After James left, Mary entered Raymond's room, trying to mask the worry in her eyes. "Mr. Raymond, would you like something to eat?" she asked, but Raymond just shook his head. "No, Mary. I'm not hungry." He gazed out the window, his eyes empty. "Mary, do you think they still care about me?" he asked, his voice choking. Mary didn't know how to respond. She lowered her head and stayed silent. The silence stretched on, broken only by Raymond's heavy sigh. "Perhaps I was wrong to dedicate my life to them," he said, tears streaming down his face. That afternoon, James returned, this time with a different attitude. He walked into Raymond's room, a fake smile plastered on his face. "Father, I have something to discuss," he began, his tone sweet but calculating. "I think you should consider dividing your assets fairly. Anna and David are busy, but I'm always here, looking after you." Raymond looked at James, his eyes betraying a flicker of doubt. "Are you looking after me, or after my assets?" he asked, his weak voice filled with subtle irony. James smiled, avoiding the question. "Father, I just want everything to be fair. I don't want any disputes between us siblings later on." Mary, standing outside the door, overheard the conversation and felt a surge of anxiety. She knew James was up to something, but she didn't dare interfere. James held power in the family, and she was just a maid. That night, as Mary tidied Raymond's room, he softly called her over. "Mary, do you think I was wrong to trust my children?" he asked, his voice trembling. Mary didn't know what to say. She simply took his frail hand, hoping to comfort him with her touch. But deep down, she knew the answer was yes. The villa sank back into a deathly silence. Raymond lay in bed, engulfed by loneliness. Meanwhile, James sat in the study, his eyes full of schemes as he stared at the family portrait. "All of this will be mine one day," he muttered to himself. Through a crack in the door, Mary saw James holding a folder and smiling. She sighed, her heart heavy with worry for Raymond. She knew that no matter how much she tried, she could never replace the love of a parent's children. One morning, as Mary was tidying up the living room, James came downstairs carrying a large envelope. His eyes gleamed with smug satisfaction, as if he had just made a discovery. Mary stepped aside, trying to appear indifferent, but her worried gaze betrayed her as she saw James muttering something under his breath. "Mary," James called out loudly, startling her. "Do you know where Father keeps his will?" "Mr. James, I don't know anything about that," Mary replied, striving to keep her voice calm. "Mr. Raymond has never spoken to me about his will." James smirked, stepping closer to Mary, his eyes probing. "You've been here for many years, haven't you? Are you sure you don't know? Or are you just trying to protect him?" Mary felt the tension in the air grow stifling. "I'm just a maid, mister. I don't involve myself in family matters," she said, lowering her gaze. James said nothing more, but his eyes revealed his suspicion. After a moment, he turned and walked away. Mary felt a wave of unease. She knew James wasn't one to give up easily. That afternoon, as Mary brought lunch to Raymond, the old man looked at her with weary eyes. "Do you find James suspicious?" Raymond asked, his voice hoarse. Mary hesitated for a moment before nodding. "He asked me about your will. I don't know what his intentions are, but I think you should be cautious." Raymond fell silent, his gaze distant. "I don't understand why James has become like this. I once hoped he would be the leader of the family, a pillar for his siblings, but now, he only cares about money." Mary didn't know how to console him. She looked at Raymond, her heart filled with pity. He had once been a strong man, but now he was just a shadow of himself, abandoned by the children he loved so dearly. That evening, James called his siblings, Anna and David, asking them to come to the villa for an important discussion. When Anna arrived, James was already sitting in the living room, a glass of red wine in hand. "Anna, we need to have a serious talk about Father and the inheritance," James began, his tone cold. Anna looked at her brother, surprised. "What is this about, James? Father is ill, shouldn't we be thinking about his health right now?" she said, though her voice lacked its former confidence. "You're too naive, Anna," James said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Father doesn't have much time left. If we don't settle things now, it will be a mess later. Did David tell you he doesn't want to get involved?" Anna shook her head, confused. "David didn't say anything. But I think we should focus on Father's well-being. I don't want to fight over anything." James shrugged, as if her opinion didn't matter. He continued, "Fine. But remember, if you do nothing, someone else will take everything. Father can change his will at any time, you understand that, don't you?" Anna remained silent. James's words began to plant seeds of doubt in her mind. She didn't want to think about Father changing his will, but James had instilled a sense of unease within her. When David arrived in the evening, James repeated the same words. At first, David strongly opposed him. "What are you talking about? We should be taking care of Dad, not sitting here worrying about the inheritance," he said angrily. But James wasn't one to give up easily. "David, don't be stupid. I'm doing this for us. If you think Dad is going to leave everything without a plan, you're too naive. Do you want Anna to take everything? Or Mary?" "Mary?" David was surprised. "Mary is just a maid. You can't seriously suspect her of anything. James let out a cold laugh. She's been here for years. Are you sure she doesn't have her own intentions? Think about it, David. I'm only trying to protect what's ours. David fell silent, his face full of conflict. He didn't fully trust James, but his brother's words began to sow seeds of doubt in his mind. Meanwhile, Raymond, despite his frail health, overheard the conversations between his children. Each word they spoke was like a dagger to his heart. They only care about my wealth, not about me, he whispered to Mary, tears streaming down his face. Mary didn't know what to say, so she simply sat beside him, holding his hand in a silence heavy with sorrow. She couldn't understand how Raymond's children could treat him this way, the father who had sacrificed his entire life for them. That evening, Mary caught James standing outside Raymond's study, his eyes full of calculation. "What are you doing again, Mr. James?" she asked coldly. James turned around, flashing a fake smile. "Oh, nothing, Mary. I just wanted to make sure everything is in order." A chill ran down Mary's spine. She knew James was up to something, but she couldn't stop him. The next morning, Raymond struggled to sit up in his large bed, but his weak body allowed only slight movements. "Mary," he called faintly, his voice barely audible. Hearing him, Mary hurried into the room, her expression filled with concern. "Mr. Raymond, do you need something?" she asked, gently helping him up. Raymond looked at her, his eyes filled with deep contemplation. "I want to call my children. I need to talk to them, one last time." Mary hesitated. She knew Raymond's heart had been broken by witnessing his children's distance and scheming, but she also knew that his heartfelt words might not be enough to move them. Still, she couldn't refuse. "I'll call them," Mary said softly, though her voice couldn't hide her unease. She stepped out, picked up the phone, and called James, Anna, and David one by one. On the other end of the line, James picked up after several rings. "What is it, Mary?" he asked coldly, his tone indifferent. "Mr. James, Mr. Raymond wants to see all of you. He says it's an important meeting," Mary said, trying to keep her voice calm. James sighed, clearly uninterested. "I'm busy. If it's important, you can tell me later." "But Mr. Raymond specifically requested your presence." James interrupted. "Fine, I'll try to make time, but don't expect me to be there soon." Mary felt disheartened but said nothing more. She moved on to call Anna. The daughter who had once been closest to Raymond answered, but her voice was also cold. "Mary, I'm very busy. I have to take the kids to school. I'll call back later." Mary tried to persuade her. "Mra Anna," Raymond said, "this is very important, possibly the last time." "The last time?" Anna hesitated, but quickly added, as if justifying herself, "I really can't leave everything right now. Whatever it is, just tell James." The call with David wasn't much better. He answered with a tired voice. "Mary, I know Dad wants to see us, but things at the office are very stressful right now. I'll try to come after work, but I can't promise." Mary hung up, her heart heavy. She returned to Raymond's room, unsure of how to respond to him. Raymond looked at her, his eyes filled with fragile hope. "What did they say?" he asked. Mary lowered her head, unable to meet his gaze. They're very busy, mister, but they said they'll try to come." Raymond fell silent, his frail hands clutching the blanket tightly. He said no more, only gazing out of the window with vacant eyes. Mary stood beside him, her heart aching as she watched him seem to collapse under the weight of despair. That afternoon, James was the first to arrive. He entered the room with a displeased expression, as though his presence was a burden. "Dad, I'm here as you asked. What do you need to discuss?" Raymond looked at James, his weary eyes struggling to stay steady, but his voice remained calm. "Sit down. I want to talk about the family, about you and your siblings." James frowned but sat down on a chair opposite the bed. "Dad, I'm very busy. If you have something to say, make it quick." Raymond took a deep breath, his eyes reflecting deep pain. "James, do you remember the days when we were all together? When family meant everything?" James shrugged. "Dad, times have changed. Everyone has their own lives now. That's just how it is." "Life?" Raymond repeated, his voice trembling. "You call ignoring me, abandoning the family, life?" James didn't reply, only shrugged again and glanced at his watch. "If this is what you want to talk about, I don't think we need to drag it out." While the conversation continued, Anna and David still hadn't arrived. As time passed, Raymond grew increasingly impatient. "Mary, call them again," he urged, his voice filled with desperation. Mary tried once more to reach Anna and David, but neither of them answered. She returned to the room, where James sat scrolling through his phone, completely indifferent to his father's condition. "Mr. Raymond, they're not picking up," Mary said quietly. Raymond was silent, as though all the strength left in him had been drained. "Do you know what hurts the most, Mary?" he asked, his voice faint. "What is it, mister?" "It's seeing the children you love the most become strangers," Raymond whispered, tears rolling down his gaunt cheeks. James stood up, his face devoid of any emotion. "If there's nothing else, I'll be going now. Take care of yourself, Dad." He walked quickly out of the room, leaving Raymond in the empty silence, his labored breathing the only sound. Mary sat beside Raymond, holding his trembling hand. "Mr. Raymond, please don't be too sad. At least you still have me here," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Raymond nodded weakly, but his eyes were filled with despair. "Thank you, Mary. But you're not my family. My family died long ago." Those words felt like a dagger to Mary's heart. She sat quietly, unable to do anything but stay by his side in the unbearable loneliness that could no longer be mended. That evening, Raymond sat silently in the chair by the window. The room was bathed in dim light from a small table lamp, creating a somber atmosphere. In his hands was an old family photo frame, taken decades ago. Anna was a cheerful little girl with braided hair, David was small and clinging to his leg as if afraid of getting lost. James, though the eldest, flashed a bright smile, a picture that Raymond could barely associate with the cold, greedy man he had become. "Mr. Raymond, would you like some tea?" Mary entered the room, her voice soft as though afraid to disturb the stillness. Raymond looked up at her, his eyes hollow. "No, Mary. Can you just sit with me for a while?" Mary placed the tea tray on the table and pulled a chair close to him. She observed Raymond's trembling hands as he held the photo frame. "This photo is beautiful, mister. Your children look so happy," she said, trying to offer some comfort. Raymond let out a faint, bitter laugh, as though her words only deepened his sorrow. "Happy? Yes, those were the times when everything felt complete. I did everything for them, but now I wonder if it was worth it." Mary didn't know how to respond. She looked at Raymond, feeling the pain and loneliness that enveloped him. After a moment, Raymond spoke softly, almost as if talking to himself. "You know, Mary, I once believed that love could keep my family together forever. But now, look at them. The children I once loved the most now just want me gone so they can fight over my wealth." Mary was about to say something, but Raymond raised his hand, signaling her to let him continue. "I was blind. I hoped James would lead this family, but all he cares about is money. Anna, sweet little Anna, is no different now. And David, he's not cruel, but he's not strong enough to stand up to James." Mary remained silent, knowing there were no words that could ease Raymond's pain. Suddenly, a knock at the door startled them both. Mary stood up and went to open it. Standing before her was James, his eyes filled with calculation and his expression betraying his irritation. "Mr. James, why are you back so late?" Mary asked, her tone cautious and watchful. "I need to talk to my father," James said as he strode into the room without waiting for permission. Raymond sat in his chair, watching James enter with a cold expression. "Why are you back, James? I thought our conversation was over." James smirked and pulled a chair closer to his father. "Father, I'm not here to argue. I just want to make sure you've thought through how to arrange the inheritance." Raymond's brow furrowed, his eyes growing sharp. "Do you think that's something you have the right to meddle in? The will is my decision, not yours." James shrugged, his tone steady and calculated. "Father, I just want things to be fair. Anna and David don't understand the value of what you've built, and Mary," he glanced at Mary, who stood near the door. "She's just a maid. I think you should be careful about who you trust." Raymond slammed his hand on the table, startling both James and Mary. "That's enough, James. I will not allow you to insult Mary. She's the only one who's been here for me while you and your siblings turned your backs. If anyone is taking advantage of me, it's you." James was silent for a moment but then stood up, his eyes flashing with anger. "Fine, Father. I'm just trying to help you see reality. I won't let anyone destroy what rightfully belongs to this family." With that, James turned and stormed out of the room, leaving Raymond breathing heavily, his face a mix of anger and anguish. Mary quickly went to his side, steadying him by his shoulders. "Mr. Raymond, please calm down. Don't let his words hurt you any further." Raymond lowered his head, covering his face with his hands. "I was wrong, Mary. What did I do wrong to make my family turn out like this?" Mary didn't know how to answer. She simply held his hand tightly, hoping to offer some solace with that simple gesture. That night, Mary stayed with Raymond until he fell asleep. But her heart was heavy with worry. It was clear that James was scheming something, and she feared that the days ahead would bring nothing good. Meanwhile, James left the villa in a hurry, pulling out his phone to make a call. "We need to find a lawyer. I won't let Mary or anyone else take what's rightfully mine," he said, his voice dripping with venom. Back at the villa, Mary watched over Raymond as he slept, wondering how much more the old man could endure. She silently vowed that no matter what happened, she would protect him from further harm. The next morning, Raymond woke up with aches all over his body. He leaned back against the pillows, his tired eyes gazing out of the window. Bright sunlight streamed into the room, but his heart remained cold, as though trapped in a perpetual winter. Mary entered with a breakfast tray, placing it on the small table by his bed. "Mr. Raymond, I've made your favorite soup," she said, trying to bring a little cheer into the room. Raymond looked at Mary and gave a faint smile, though his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. "Thank you, Mary. You're always so thoughtful," he said weakly. Mary quietly helped him sit up and began feeding him spoonfuls of soup. But after only a few bites, Raymond pushed her hand away. "I've lost my appetite," he whispered. She didn't insist, simply bowing her head and remaining by his side as a comforting presence. But they both knew the truth. Raymond's health was rapidly declining, and his children continued to turn their backs on him. That afternoon, Mary found James standing outside Raymond's study. His eyes were sharp with suspicion when he noticed her. "Mr. James, what are you looking for in there?" Mary asked, her tone firmer than usual. "Nothing. Mind your own business," James replied curtly, attempting to hide a folder he was holding. Mary stepped closer, her gaze fixed on him. "Mr. James, I don't know what you're planning, but I suggest you stop. This is Mr. Raymond's home, not yours." James smirked as he brushed past her. "It's my father's home, which means it will soon be mine. You should remember that, Mary." Mary stood still, saying nothing more. But deep inside, she knew James was plotting something bigger. That evening, Raymond weakly called Mary into his room. "Mary, I need you to do something for me," he said, his voice trembling. "Mr. Raymond, whatever you need," just tell me. I'll do my best, Mary replied, her eyes filled with determination. I want you to get the wooden box from the bookshelf, he said, pointing to the corner of the room. Mary followed his instructions and retrieved a small, old box secured with a brass lock. What is this, mister? She asked. Raymond looked at the box, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. This is my will. I don't want James or anyone else to find it. Please keep it safe for me. Mary nodded, holding the box tightly in her hands. Do you want me to give it to your lawyer? No. Keep it safe until I pass away. Then, give it to the lawyer. You're the only one I trust. Mary felt the gravity of Raymond's words. She hugged the box to her chest, silently promising to protect it at all costs. The next morning, Anna unexpectedly arrived at the villa. Mary opened the door, surprised to see Raymond's daughter standing at the gate with a tense expression. "Mra Anna, are you here to visit your father?" Mary asked, unable to hide her astonishment. "Yes, I think it's time I spoke to him," Anna replied, her voice tinged with hesitation. Mary led her upstairs. When Anna stepped into the room, Raymond's eyes lit up with a glimmer of hope. "Anna, you've finally come," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Anna sat by his bed, forcing a smile. "Father, I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. But you know how busy I've been." Raymond didn't reproach her, he only nodded. "It's good that you're here. I've been hoping to see you." Their conversation was strained. Anna tried to maintain a calm demeanor, but Raymond could sense the distance in her words. "Do you remember when you were little, you used to say you'd never let me be alone?" Raymond asked, his voice trembling. Anna pressed her lips together, not answering. Memories from the past flooded her mind, but the years had eroded their bond. "I'm really sorry, Father," she whispered, though her voice lacked genuine emotion. Raymond sighed. "I don't blame you, Anna. I only hope that one day, you'll understand that family is more important than anything else." Anna lowered her head, not responding. She stayed for a few more minutes before standing up to leave, promising to visit again soon. But neither Raymond nor Mary believed that promise would come true. After Anna left, Mary looked at Raymond, whose eyes were filled with disappointment. "Do you see, Mary? Those were just empty words." "Mr. Raymond, at least she came." "Perhaps there's hope for change," Mary said, trying to comfort him. "No, Mary. I lost my family a long time ago," Raymond replied, his voice heavy with resignation. That night, Raymond couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, his eyes fixed on the dark ceiling, where the faint glow from the bedside lamp barely illuminated the corners of the room. Beside him, the family photo on the small table still radiated warmth from the past. But now, those memories only deepened his pain. Mary entered, carrying a glass of warm water. "Mr. Raymond, is there anything you need?" she asked, her voice as gentle as ever. Raymond turned to look at her, his eyes weary. "No, Mary. Just sit with me for a while, that's enough." Mary set the glass on the table and pulled a chair close to his bed. The silence between them stretched, broken only by Raymond's faint, labored breathing. "Mary, where do you think I went wrong?" Raymond suddenly asked, his voice hoarse. Mary paused. "Mr. Raymond, I don't think you were wrong. You did everything for your family." Raymond let out a faint, bitter laugh. "And yet, look at the result. The children I once hoped would stay close to each other now care only about my wealth." Mary didn't know what to say. She understood that her words of comfort could not ease Raymond's pain. Suddenly, the sound of faint clattering echoed from the hallway. Mary stood up and quickly stepped outside. In the dim light, she saw James sneaking toward Raymond's study. "Mr. James, what are you doing here again?" Mary asked, her tone firm. James froze, turning to her with a cold glare. "None of your business, Mary. I'm just checking on a few things. Checking on what at this hour of the night? Mary pressed. Mr. Raymond is resting. I think you should leave everything as it is. James stepped closer to her, his eyes blazing with anger. Who do you think you are to speak to me like this? This is my father's house, and I can do whatever I want. Mary stood her ground, unyielding. Mr. Raymond entrusted everything to me. If you do anything to harm him, I won't stand by. James smirked and turned to leave. But before he disappeared into the shadows, he looked back and delivered a chilling warning. Stay out of my business, Mary. You don't want to make trouble for yourself. Mary watched as James's figure vanished into the dark hallway, her heart heavy with worry. She knew he wouldn't give up easily. The next morning, Raymond's health had deteriorated visibly. He no longer had the strength to sit up. Mary stayed by his side, her eyes filled with concern, never leaving him. Mr. Raymond, should I call a doctor? She asked, but he weakly shook his head. No need, Mary. I know my time is near, he said in a faint whisper. Mary held his hand, tears streaming down her face. You can't say that. You need to stay strong. Raymond gave her a faint, sorrowful smile. I've lived long enough, Mary. But what breaks my heart isn't death, it's that my family has fallen apart. At that moment, James appeared once again in the villa. This time, he made no effort to hide his intentions. He stormed into Raymond's room, ignoring Mary's attempts to stop him. Father, I need to talk to you, James declared, his tone commanding. Raymond looked at him, his eyes no longer angry, only exhausted. What do you want now, James? I want to make sure you're not leaving your assets to those who don't deserve them. You should think about the future of this family, James said, his eyes gleaming with greed. Raymond remained silent for a moment before letting out a deep sigh. Family? You talk as if you care about family, but all you care about is money. James opened his mouth to argue, but Raymond raised a hand to stop him. I'm tired, James. If you have nothing else to say, you may leave. James stood still, his face twisted with frustration. Fine. But remember, you'll regret it if you don't listen to me. He turned and stormed out, leaving Mary by Raymond's side, her heart filled with anger and sorrow. That night, Raymond was too weak to speak. Mary sat beside his bed, holding his frail hand tightly. In the silence, Raymond whispered softly, Mary, you're the only family I have left. Tears streamed down Mary's cheeks. Mr. Raymond, I'll always be here for you, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Raymond gave her a faint, final smile. Moments later, his weary eyes closed, his last breath escaping gently, leaving behind a heavy silence filled with sorrow in the room. Mary sat there, Raymond's hand still clasped tightly in hers. The grand villa now felt emptier than ever. James, Anna, and David were not present when Raymond passed away. They only received a message from Mary the following morning. Yet even the news of their father's death failed to stir much emotion in them. James merely smirked, Anna sighed, and David, the only one who showed a hint of feeling, bowed his head in silence. Mary observed their cold expressions when they arrived for the funeral, her heart filled with disappointment. Yet deep down, she knew she had done the right thing, protecting Raymond until his final breath. 3 months after Raymond's death, James, Anna, and David received a letter from Raymond's lawyer, requesting their presence for the reading of his will. It was a cold, dreary morning, with gray skies and a tense atmosphere filling the meeting room. Mary had arrived early and sat quietly in a corner, her face calm but her eyes betraying anticipation. James walked in with an irritated expression, scanning the room before letting out a derisive laugh. I don't see why we had to wait this long to read the will. Everything should have been settled already. Anna sat beside him, saying nothing as she adjusted her scarf. David, the only one who seemed somewhat uneasy, kept his gaze fixed on the table. The lawyer, Mr. Albert, an elderly man with sharp eyes, entered the room holding a thick folder. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and began. "Thank you all for coming. This is the reading of Mr. Raymond S. will. Before we proceed, I want to remind everyone that every decision in this document was made by Mr. Raymond when he was of sound mind." James cleared his throat and interrupted. "We don't need a long preamble. Just get to the point." Albert glanced at James, his expression unchanged. He opened the folder and began reading. "I, Raymond, being of sound mind, hereby declare this as my last will and testament." The room fell silent as Albert continued. "The majority of my estate, including the villa and my investments, will be transferred to Mary, who cared for me devotedly during my final years." James shot to his feet, his face red with anger. "What? This has to be a joke. A maid inheriting the estate?" Albert paused and looked up at James. "Mr. James, please remain calm. This was your father's decision." James clenched his fists, struggling to contain his fury. "Impossible. My father must have been manipulated by Mary. I won't accept this." Unperturbed by James's outburst, Albert continued. "I also wish to allocate a significant portion of my assets to establish a charity fund named the Raymond Foundation, aimed at supporting elderly individuals who are alone. I believe this is the best way to honor my life." Anna looked up, her eyes filled with surprise. "A charity fund? But what about us? Didn't father leave anything for his children?" Albert nodded and continued. "To each of my children James, Anna, and David I leave a modest sum sufficient to ensure their stability, but no more. I want my children to discover the true value of life rather than relying on my wealth." David lowered his head, his hands clenched tightly. Anna remained silent, but James could no longer hold back. "No. I'm going to contest this. I won't let an unfair will like this determine my future." Mary, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke. "Mr. James, Raymond dedicated his entire life to loving his children. But in the end, he realized that your greed and indifference had torn the family apart. This isn't injustice. This is fairness." James spun around, his eyes blazing. "What do you know? You're just a maid." Mary stood, meeting his gaze with calm resolve. "Yes, I am just a maid. But I was there for your father when he needed someone the most. He didn't need money or power. He needed love from his family, something you never gave him." James opened his mouth to retort, but Anna grabbed his arm and whispered, "James, enough. Don't make things worse." The room fell into silence as Albert closed the folder. "This concludes the reading of the will. If anyone has questions, you may contact me." James stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Anna and David exchanged glances before bowing slightly to Mary and leaving. Mary remained where she was, her eyes watching them go, filled with sadness. When only Mary and Albert were left in the room, the lawyer spoke. "Mary, Mr. Raymond placed great trust in you. I hope you'll use this inheritance to fulfill his wishes." Mary nodded, her gaze firm. "I promise to honor Mr. Raymond's wishes. This is not just a responsibility but a tribute to him." After the reading, James drove home in a rage. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes dark with fury. "This can't be happening," he muttered. "How could a maid inherit my father's estate? And a charity fund? This is clearly Mary's scheme." Meanwhile, Anna returned home, feeling conflicted. She sat on the sofa, her mind in turmoil. Her father's final words in the will echoed in her mind, "I want my children to discover the true value of life." She recalled her childhood, when her father was always there for her during times of sadness or difficulty. But as she grew older, she had distanced herself from him, letting the pressures of life overshadow her love for her family. David, the quietest during the reading, decided to visit Mary the next morning. He found her at Raymond's old villa, where she was tending to the property and preparing to establish the charity fund. "Mary, may I speak with you?" David asked hesitantly. Mary was pruning rose bushes in the garden. Hearing David, she turned and gave him a gentle smile. "Of course, Mr. David. What would you like to discuss?" David sat on a nearby wooden bench, wringing his hat in his hands. "I want to apologize. I know my father was deeply disappointed in us, especially in me. I let work and life distract me and forgot that he needed me." Mary set down her shears and stepped closer to him. "Mr. David, it's never too late to apologize. What matters is that you've recognized your mistakes and are willing to make amends. That's what Mr. Raymond wanted to see." David nodded, determination flickering in his eyes. "I want to be part of the charity fund. I want to do something to honor my father." Mary looked at him, her heart feeling a weight lift. "Mr. Raymond would be very proud of your decision. The charity fund will need the help of everyone to create meaningful change." Meanwhile, James refused to accept defeat. He hired a private lawyer, determined to contest the will. "We'll prove this will is invalid," he told the lawyer. "I'm certain Mary manipulated my father." What James didn't anticipate was that his actions would raise suspicion among certain family members. One of them was Ethan, Raymond's younger brother. When Ethan learned of James's plans to contest the will, he decided to confront him directly. One morning, James received a call from Ethan. "James, can you meet me at Café the Sun Café? I need to talk to you," Ethan said, his tone somber. Reluctantly, James agreed. When he arrived at the café, he found Ethan already seated, a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. "You don't understand why I wanted to meet you," James said as he sat down. Ethan looked at James with a stern expression. "I've heard you're trying to sue Mary to reclaim Raymond's estate. Is that true?" James raised an eyebrow, unable to hide his annoyance. "Yes, because it's clear Mary manipulated my father. Can't you see that?" Ethan shook his head, his voice lowering. "James, you're wrong. Mary was the only one by Raymond's side when he needed someone the most. But where were you? Where were you when your father was lonely in his final days?" James felt as though a dagger had pierced his pride. "You don't understand. I was busy with work, I couldn't be there all the time." Ethan frowned. "Couldn't or didn't want to? You've let greed overshadow everything. Do you really think filing lawsuits will lead to anything good? All you're doing is further tarnishing your father's memory." James didn't respond, his head bowed. Ethan's words seemed to strike a chord deep within him, but his pride made him unwilling to admit it. Meanwhile, Anna decided to visit the charity fund Mary was establishing. She felt a need to honor her father's wishes. When she arrived, she saw Mary busy working with a group of volunteers. "Mary," Anna called softly. Mary turned around, slightly surprised. "Mra Anna, it's good to see you here. How can I help you?" Anna hesitated for a moment, then said, "I want to join the charity. I know my father was deeply disappointed in me, and I want to change that." Mary smiled and nodded. "Mr. Raymond would be very happy to know you've realized what truly matters. The charity can use all the help it can get." Anna felt a weight lift from her chest. She began participating in activities with Mary, and day by day, she discovered a joy she had never experienced before in helping others. 2 months after the Raymond Foundation officially launched, a significant transformation began to take shape in the lives of Raymond's children. With Mary's guidance and Anna and David's assistance, the foundation organized numerous programs to support elderly individuals in the community. Each time they saw the joyful smiles of the elderly they helped, Anna and David felt their father's presence, as though he were watching them with pride. One morning, Anna and David met at the foundation's office. Anna was reviewing a list of seniors receiving aid when David walked in with a bag of pastries. "Sis, I brought some breakfast. We'll need the energy for today's meeting," David said, smiling. Anna smiled back. "Thanks, David. You've been really proactive lately. I didn't think you'd be this enthusiastic about the work." David nodded, his expression thoughtful. "At first, I just wanted to make up for my failures with Dad. But the more I do this, the more I realize helping others brings real happiness. I think Dad wanted us to find meaning in things like this." Anna agreed, her gaze softening. "I feel the same. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something right." Meanwhile, James remained consumed by anger and bitterness. Despite Ethan's warnings, he persisted in suing Mary, convinced she had manipulated his father into leaving her the estate. However, all of James's efforts failed. The court upheld the validity of the will, and all the evidence James presented was dismissed. One evening, James sat alone in his luxurious but cold apartment. He looked around, realizing how empty the space was. There was no one by his side, no laughter or warmth from family. Even the friends he had once boasted to had distanced themselves, tired of his bitterness and greed. James picked up his phone, intending to call Anna or David, but stopped himself. "They won't answer," he muttered. "I've pushed everyone away." In the days that followed, James began visiting the cemetery where Raymond was buried. He stood before his father's grave, staring at the words etched on the tombstone, "A father who dedicated his life to loving his family." Those words felt like a dagger to his heart. "Dad, I was wrong," James whispered, his voice breaking. "I was selfish. I only thought about myself and never realized what you needed." There was no response, only a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. But James felt a small sense of relief, as if Raymond were listening. At the same time, Mary, Anna, and David held an event at the foundation to honor its supporters. Mary stood on the stage, her kind smile radiating as she addressed the crowd of cheerful faces. The Raymond Foundation is not just a place to support the elderly. It is a symbol of the love and unity that Mr. Raymond always hoped for. "Today, we thank everyone who has come together to help," Mary said, her voice filled with emotion. Anna and David stood in the audience, clapping along with everyone else. They felt as though they were fulfilling a part of their father's wishes, and it brought them immense comfort. A week after the event, James unexpectedly showed up at the foundation's office. When Mary saw him, she couldn't hide her surprise. "Mr. James, what brings you here?" James lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. I want to talk." Mary sat down and motioned for him to continue. "I'm listening." "I was wrong," James said, his voice so quiet Mary had to strain to hear him. "I let greed blind me. I know my father was disappointed in me, and I want to make amends. If you'll allow it, I want to be part of the foundation, to carry out my father's wishes." Mary studied James for a long moment, her gaze searching. "Mr. James, you've hurt many people, especially your father. But if you're truly willing to change, the foundation is always open to those ready to help." James nodded, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Mary. I won't let you or my father down again." From that day forward, James began participating in the foundation's activities. Though he initially faced skepticism from others, his effort and sincerity gradually won back their trust. One day, as the family Anna, David, and James worked together at the foundation, Mary watched them with a sense of peace. She remembered the days when Raymond had been heartbroken over his children's estrangement. Now, she believed he would smile seeing his family finally united. That afternoon, Anna said to David, "I think Dad is watching us from above, feeling proud." David nodded, gazing out the window. "Yes, you're right. Dad left us more than just an inheritance. He left us a legacy of love." James stood quietly behind them, hearing their words and feeling a pang of sadness. But this time, he didn't feel regret. Instead, he felt he was finally rediscovering the true meaning of life. Raymond's story leaves a profound lesson about the value of love and family. It reminds us that money and possessions can never replace care, connection, and responsibility toward our loved ones. Greed and selfishness, as James experienced, lead only to loneliness and regret. Conversely, recognizing our mistakes and striving for good, as Anna and David did, brings true purpose to life. Above all, the greatest legacy we can leave isn't wealth but the human values we impart.
If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.